What if the deepest point on the surface of the Earth wasn't in the ocean at all? Lake Baikal holds more water than every one of the 5 Great Lakes combined, and its floor sits so far down that most of the machines built to reach it have failed. For most of history, no one knew what was actually down there. That is about to change. In southeastern Siberia, at the geographic heart of Asia, lies a lake that does not look like much from the shore. Its surface area ranks only 7th in the world, smaller than Lake Michigan, smaller than Lake Superior, a fraction of the Caspian Sea. By that measurement alone, Baikal should be unremarkable. It is not, because size on the surface has almost nothing to do with what is happening underneath. Baikal holds 23,610 cubic kilometers of water. That is nearly twice the volume of Lake Superior, 5 times the volume of Lake Michigan, and more than every Great Lake in North America combined, all held inside a lake with a fraction of their surface area. The reason is depth. The average depth across the entire lake is 744 meters, nearly as tall as the Burj Khalifa, the tallest building on Earth. That is the average. At its deepest point, Baikal plunges to 1,642 meters. Stack 5.5 Eiffel Towers on top of one another, and the entire structure would disappear beneath the surface. And that is still not the bottom. Below the water lies another 7 kilometers of accumulated sediment, pressed down over tens of millions of years. Add that to the water column above it, and the true floor of the rift sits somewhere between 8 and 11 kilometers beneath the surface. That number puts Baikal in the same conversation as the Mariana Trench, the deepest point in any ocean on the planet. A lake, competing with the deepest place on Earth. Which raises an obvious question. What kind of geological event carves a scar deep enough to rival the ocean floor in the middle of a continent, thousands of kilometers from any sea? Most lakes on Earth share the same origin story. An ice age ends, glaciers retreat, and the meltwater fills the low ground left behind. Nearly every lake visible on a map today formed this way in the last 100,000 years. Baikal did not. Baikal sits on a divergent plate boundary, where the Amur plate is slowly tearing itself away from the Eurasian plate. As the two plates pull apart, the ground between them drops, and erosion widens the gap further over time. It is the same mechanism that built the Great Rift Valley in East Africa, except here, the rift filled with water instead of open sky. Geologists estimate the lake at 25 to 30 million years old, which by some measurements makes it the oldest lake on the planet. To put that in perspective, Baikal was already ancient when the Himalayas were still being pushed skyward by the collision of the Indian subcontinent with Asia. It existed during the Oligocene, a period when the rhinoceros had a distant, far larger ancestor roaming the same continent, and predatory flightless birds twice the size of anything alive today stalked the region surrounding it. This is a wound in the Earth's crust, torn open by two plates pulling apart, and it has been slowly widening for tens of millions of years. It is still widening today. The region remains seismically active, with earthquakes recorded along the rift on a regular basis. A quiet reminder that the process which carved Baikal has never actually stopped. Which means the story of what lives inside it is the story of millions of years spent almost entirely alone. That violence beneath the surface is not purely historical. In January of 1861, a powerful earthquake struck the Selenga River Delta on Baikal's eastern shore. Within hours, roughly 200 square kilometers of dry land dropped beneath the surface of the lake, taking several Buryat villages down with it. Residents were forced to flee across the ice in the middle of winter as the ground gave way behind them. The submerged area is still visible on maps today, marked as Proval Bay, Russian for collapse or failure. It remains one of the clearest examples on Earth of a rift boundary actively consuming land in real time, rather than over some unobservable geological timescale. Every winter, that ongoing violence beneath the surface produces something strange on top of it. From roughly January through May, Baikal freezes over almost entirely, and the ice that forms is unlike ice found anywhere else. In places, it grows so transparent that boulders on the lakebed remain visible from above, as though the surface were made of glass, rather than frozen water. Across sections of that ice, perfectly circular patches appear each spring, some stretching more than 4 kilometers wide, thinner and more fragile than the ice surrounding them. Satellite images first drew wide attention to the phenomenon, and researchers have proposed that warm water rising from below, possibly linked to methane seeping up through the rift, is responsible for thinning the ice from underneath in these near-perfect circles. The full mechanism behind their shape is still debated. The ice does something else researchers still cannot fully explain. As temperatures shift, the surface cracks under pressure and produces sounds compared to lasers or gunfire, a groaning, booming chorus that carries for kilometers across the frozen lake. Locals have described the sound for generations. Scientists studying the acoustics of lake ice are still working out precisely why Baikal's cracking carries so much further and so much louder than ice on smaller lakes. A rift that never stopped tearing. Ice that behaves like nothing else on the planet. And underneath both, an ecosystem that has had tens of millions of years to grow strange in the dark. Isolation this long tends to produce one of two outcomes. Either very little survives, or something highly unusual does. Baikal chose the second option. The lake supports roughly 1,000 species of plants, and over 1,550 species of animals, and more than 60% of them exist nowhere else on Earth. Among them is the Baikal seal, or NERPA, the only entirely freshwater seal species on the planet, found in no ocean, no sea, and no other lake anywhere in the world. Genetic studies place its closest relatives among Arctic ringed seals, hundreds of kilometers away, which has left researchers without a fully settled explanation for how a marine mammal ended up landlocked at the heart of Asia. The leading theory involves ancient river systems that once connected the region to the Arctic Ocean, systems that vanished long before recorded history began, leaving the seals stranded in a lake that has been their entire world ever since. There is a second, quieter reason so much has managed to survive here. In most deep lakes, oxygen thins dramatically with depth, and life thins along with it. Baikal's waters remain unusually well mixed from top to bottom, carrying oxygen down to depths where most freshwater environments would already be dead. Combine that with millions of years of near-total isolation, and evolution had the two ingredients it needed: the resources to survive and the time to become strange. And the deeper researchers look into what actually lives down there, the stranger the picture becomes. Isolation does something else, too. It leaves room for stories. At the center of the lake sits Olkhon Island, considered by the Buryat people, the region's indigenous population, to be one of the most sacred places in Asia. Shaman Rock, a twin-peaked outcrop on the island's shore, has been treated as a spiritual boundary for centuries, a place so significant that women were historically forbidden from approaching it, and commoners were barred from entering at all. Local tradition holds that the cave beneath the rock once served as the dwelling place of the lake's ruling spirit, and Buryat shamans continued performing rituals at the site well into the modern era. Whatever lies beneath Baikal's surface, the people who have lived alongside it the longest have never treated it as an ordinary lake. For generations, communities living along the shores of Makorsky Bay, the warmest stretch of the lake, told of a creature living beneath the surface. Locals described a massive lizard-like animal capable of dragging fishermen down into an underwater kingdom, and some left offerings of fur, jewelry, and food at the water's edge to keep it from attacking their boats. For most of history, that was all it was. A story passed down with no way to test it. Then, in the late 1980s, researchers surveying the lake bottom with echolocation equipment recorded something on their instruments. A moving object longer than 30 meters, tracked at depth, with no clear explanation for what it was. The equipment registered a mass. It could not identify what that mass belonged to. No confirmed evidence has surfaced since. But the anomaly itself was real, and it was recorded by scientific instruments, not passed down as folklore. That distinction matters. A campfire story is easy to dismiss. An unexplained sonar reading, logged by a research team using scientific equipment, is a different kind of unresolved. Alongside the creature stories sit stranger reports still, including accounts from divers describing unidentified objects moving beneath the surface, and one local legend that describes a bottomless abyss at the deepest point of the lake, said to open into another world entirely. None of it has ever been confirmed, but something was tracked beneath Baikal's surface using real instruments, and to this day, no one has been able to say exactly what it was. So, before going any deeper, it is worth pausing here. If anyone watching has come across unexplained sonar footage or grown up with regional legends about Baikal, it is worth sharing below. Legends are one thing. Reaching the actual floor of the lake is another problem entirely, and for most of history, it was simply not possible. That changed in the summer of 2008, when Russian polar explorer Artur Chilingirov led a series of manned expeditions using the Mir-1 and Mir-2 submersibles, the same class of deep-diving vehicles previously used to survey the wreck of the Titanic. Over multiple dives conducted through 2010, the submersibles carried researchers down to the true floor of Baikal for direct observation, rather than relying on remote sensors alone. What they found reshaped what scientists understood about the lake. Active methane seeps were identified rising from the lake bed, alongside deposits of methane hydrate, a crystalline ice-like structure that traps natural gas within its molecular lattice and remains stable only under the immense pressure found at extreme depth. Researchers also confirmed the presence of oil deposits at depth, a discovery with real implications given that Baikal supplies roughly 20% of the planet's unfrozen surface freshwater. Perhaps the most valuable discovery had nothing to do with monsters' oil or vents. Sediment cores extracted from the lake bed preserved an uninterrupted climate record stretching back millions of years, layer by layer, undisturbed by the glacial scouring that destroyed similar records elsewhere on Earth. In a lake this old, buried in sediment this deep, scientists found something close to an unbroken diary of the planet's climate history. The manned dives answered some of the oldest questions about what lies beneath Baikal. They also opened new ones. Reaching the floor with a submersible is one form of exploration. Listening to what passes through the water above it is another, and Baikal is currently home to one of the most unusual scientific instruments on the planet. Suspended in the depths of the lake is the Baikal Gigaton Volume Detector, an array of thousands of optical sensors anchored to the lake bed and extending upward through more than a kilometer of water. Its purpose has nothing to do with the lake itself. The detector is designed to catch neutrinos, nearly massless particles that pass through ordinary matter by the trillions every second, arriving at Earth from exploding stars and violent events at the far edge of the observable universe. Baikal's extraordinary clarity and its permanent winter ice cover, which provides a stable platform for lowering equipment, make it one of only a handful of locations on the planet suited to this kind of detector. The only comparable facilities on Earth sit at the South Pole, buried deep in Antarctic ice, and at the bottom of the Mediterranean Sea, which places a rift lake in Central Asia in the same short list as two of the most extreme research environments on the planet. When a neutrino occasionally collides with a water molecule deep in the lake, it produces a faint flash of light, and the surrounding sensors record it. Scientists are using a lake that has existed for 30 million years to study particles that have been traveling for billions. A rift ancient enough to predate the Himalayas is now being used to observe light from the edge of the known universe. Even after decades of research, multiple manned expeditions, and an active particle detector suspended in its depths, most of Baikal's deep floor remains unmapped in any detailed way. The submersible dives covered specific locations. They did not survey the entire rift, and the lake faces a more immediate problem than incomplete mapping. For decades, the Baikalsk pulp and paper mill discharged industrial waste directly into the lake from its southern shore, operating for close to half a century before it was finally shut down in 2013, following sustained pressure from environmental researchers and the surrounding community. Unregulated fishing has placed additional pressure on a habitat that took tens of millions of years to develop, one where the majority of species exist nowhere else on the planet. Russia has taken steps to limit the damage, and in 1996, Baikal was declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site. But the pressure on the lake has not disappeared, and researchers continue to monitor pollution levels near the former mill site to this day. What survives in a habitat this old, this isolated, and this fragile is not something that can be rebuilt once lost. Baikal has existed for close to 30 million years. It survived the rise of the Himalayas, the extinction of the strange, oversized species that once lived along its shores, and the last several ice ages that reshaped nearly every other lake on the planet. Submersibles have touched its floor. Sensors have listened to its depths for particles born billions of years ago. And still, most of what lies within those 8 kilometers of water and sediment has never been directly observed by anyone. The real question left standing is whether anyone fully understands what is still down there, waiting in the deepest scar on the surface of the Earth. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more ancient mysteries and impossible discoveries.